I'll never understand Sega as a company. They can release countless sequels for multiple IPs that vary wildly in quality and keep doing it. But when it's a darling game that has an actually good idea to expand on, there's only one entry. I'm not mad or anything. I'm happy this game wasn't stained over time with middling to bad games. I just find it strange that despite the welcome idea of a follow-up, one never came of it. This is Ristar for the Sega Genesis. In the far-off galaxy somewhere in the Vladdy system, the space pirate Kaiser Greedy uses his mind-controlling abilities to make the planet's leaders obey him and enslave the inhabitants of planet Flora, even capturing their legendary hero. As a last effort, the inhabitants send out a prayer that travels across the galaxy and is heard by that hero's very son, Ristar, who travels to their location looking to put a stop to Kaiser and his plans and restore peace to the Vladdy system. The story is a little different in the Japanese version, in which the prayers are heard by the mother of shooting stars, Orito, and she's the one that awakens Ristar for this mission instead of the kidnapped father bit. I like this version a little better since it plays on the witching star motif Ristar has going on. I'll make this quick. In the early 1990s, Sega was on a mission to create a company mascot that could rival Nintendo's Mario. Out of the many ideas proposed was a character that had long rabbit-like ears, which could extend to pick up objects. This was discarded for being too complex. The team eventually kept on the theme of animal characters and landed on Sonic the Hedgehog, while this gameplay idea would be revisited some years later and would become Ristar. Both Sonic and Ristar's DNA comes from this one attempt at a mascot, which means that this rabbit is the original overblood for both Ristar and the Sonic series. You don't know what an overblood is?
Figured out.
At first glance, Ristar does not communicate what makes him cool very well. He's not as acrobatic as Mario with a pretty low jump, nor is he anywhere near as fast as his relative Sonic the Hedgehog with an admittedly slow movement speed. What sets Ristar apart from his peers, I guess with the exception of Bionic Commando, is his ability to stretch his arms and grab a hold of things. This is his main way of interacting with his environment, and Sega made sure to milk his idea for all it was worth. In a good way. As a matter of fact, Ristar seems to be the exact opposite of Sonic. While the Hedgehog always seems light on his feet and ready to make a snap movement at a moment's notice, Ristar feels significantly heavier, with his walking and jumping carrying so much more weight. Not to say that's a negative, because the game can be much more precise at a much lower level compared to the Sonic games, which makes it way more easier to play. Anyway, back to the grabbing. Getting Ristar's sweaty niblets on something will cause a variety of things to happen, including climbing, swinging, dragging, hanging, or any other word that could be used with groping stuff. Grappling with an enemy while on the ground will have him hold them in place, and releasing the button will sling Ristar, killing them with a headbutt. Face butt? I'm a firm believer in the fact that no one wins in a headbutt. Face butt? But I guess when your whole body is a face, life finds a way. Grabbing an enemy in midair will have Ristar hang from them. From there he can use them to help him travel over things, or swing from left to right to gain more air before face butting them away. Not all enemies are fond of you gripping them up, so some might have counterplay to the shooting star's only method of dealing damage. A cool thing the game doesn't outright teach you is Ristar's ability to grab at most walls, something a new player might do on accident and think nothing of it. But as your playthrough continues, you might notice that every time he grabs at a wall and smashes his face on it, he gains a little bit of extra height. You'll then realize that Ristar, while not as nimble as other platform characters, can get around his world just fine by bouncing off the wall like some round frustrated Spider-Man. Once this is discovered, the game with the neat gimmick and fairly simple level design opens up, and if you're that kind of player, you'll be looking for all kinds of shortcuts and other ways to get to seemingly unreachable areas with just this simple action. Another cool thing about Ristar's design that I appreciate is that the game is never confusing about the things he grabs. As soon as he gets his hands around something, the game makes sure it's instantly clear what the item is and what it's used for, which helps with the game's mission of being a simple action platformer. Throughout the levels, you can find these bars called spinners that Ristar can take a hold of and swing to gain speed and launch himself in a chosen direction. Staying on to continue your little pole show will give you the ability to launch with invincibility frames. Look, now I can tell you for free that I don't understand pole dancing, but it does make a lot more sense now seeing that they get iframes for doing it. Also hitting away on levels are secret spinners that appear once Ristar gets near one. These will take you to hidden bonus games where you're tasked with getting to the treasure within a time limit. These aren't needed for any kind of 100%ing or anything, they're just there for scoring, with every 30,000 points netting you an extra life. Speaking of treasures, they can also be found throughout the stages, as well as gold stars that replenishes 1 hit point, as well as blue ones that recover full health, and Ristar statues that are worth 1 life. There are 6 planets. Each has 2 areas and a boss, with the first areas ending in a mini-boss. Each planet's theme is what you expect. Grasslands, water, fire, and ice are present, but there are more unique worlds like the music and machine ones. As you get deeper into the game, it will begin to test you more and more on your knowledge of Ristar's grabbing abilities, whether through wall bouncing platform challenges or sections that require you to be more careful with what Ristar gets his hands on, or the result will be eating some damage. The game is also very clingy when it comes to health drops. Ristar is clearly one of those easy to play, hard to master games. The first 2 worlds do a great job of easing you into the world and learning its mechanics. But after those 2 worlds, the game expects you to know well enough by now and takes off the kitty gloves. Expect a couple of game overs beyond this point. Boss battles are also pretty well done. Once again, the first 2 bosses aren't anything to write home about, but the next couple will expect you to understand another cool quirk the game has. As you fight bosses, you might notice each time you bounce off of them, Ristar gains a little bit of invulnerability. This can be taken advantage of, so just like with levels opening up once wall climbing was discovered, the bosses too opened up once this trick is realized. Battles that once were taking your time, avoiding patterns and finding openings, now become, how can I disrespect this idiot's pattern without taking damage myself, which in itself can be used as its own self-imposed challenge. And this is probably my favorite part about Ristar's design. You don't need to know the wall clinging trick to make it far in the game. If you encounter an area like that, the game will probably provide an easier area for you somewhere else on the map. You don't need to know that Ristar gains invincibility through attacking enemies. You can play the bosses like normal bosses, although I do think you make them harder by not knowing that trick. As far as I know, you don't need to know these elements of the game in order to beat it, which means that everyone gets to play on some level, as long as that level is competent enough. If you're below that expectation, then prepare to have a hard time. I miss this part of game design. Just look at it. I don't need to tell you that Ristar is a very good looking game. If you can look beyond the game being released during the dying days of the Genesis, it really shows how far the console has come over the course of its run. The vibrant and lively colors really make the game stand out. Nothing looks bland or out of place here. The backgrounds have multiple panning layers to them that look very good, and if they don't, they're packed with beautiful details. I'm not much of a graphical fidelity guy. I can't look at something like a modern game and tell you how realistic it looks. I'm kind of blind to those kind of visuals to a degree. But I can tell you that using a spinner to get beyond the brush of the first level left me nodding my head and saying to myself, you know what? That looks pretty. I love the character designs in this game. Ristar himself has that Western trend of giving cutesy characters resting edge face, but as someone who never particularly vibed with cutesy character designs, I can't say that this is a bad look. He still does a lot of cute things though, so everyone's still eating. Some of the characters in this game make me smile. I like this intense looking horn guy on Planet Sonata, this almost Pokemon bird looking guy on Flora, and the boss of Scorch, who also kinda looks like a Pokemon too. There's also something about these derpy looking seahorses on Undertow that always brings a smile to my face, and these spazzy, sprinky guys who shoot out little fireballs are cute. Ristar is pretty big on the screen, and since his face is his body, this leaves way to make him way more expressive than your average Genesis character. He also animates very smoothly. Ristar also has custom idle animations for each planet he finds himself in, which goes a long way to make the game more, and I hate using this word, but more immersive. I could be wrong here, but I don't think I've ever seen this custom animation thing in any other game besides Ristar. So I'm gonna go ahead and say it's almost exclusively to it. It even plays a role in a boss fight down the road, which might be one of the most endearing boss fights ever seen in a video game. One of the more standout aspects of Ristar has to be its phenomenal music. The game features a range of musical styles from upbeat and catchy tunes to more atmospheric and moody tracks that perfectly fit the mood of each level they're associated with, that covers all kinds of genres from jazz to rock. The composer for the game, Tomoko Sasaki, who would later go on to compose the soundtrack for the Night series of games, did an amazing job making sure every single track was as unique as possible, and the result was some of the best sounding music on the console. So good that I tend to forget that it's even from the Genesis sound engine. My favorite song in the game has to be the track Ice Cream. I love the snow, not being in it of course, but I love looking at it. I can stare at that stuff slowly cover an area for minutes at a time, not hours. That's crazy. And that little piece of me transitions into video games and their winter themed levels. I want to say that this song started my love affair with the weather condition. The song is super chilled while keeping the otherworldly feel the rest of the music has. And it sounds like, I don't know, winter. It's hands down one of my favorite pieces of Genesis music. In my opinion, I don't think the game suffers from much, but nothing is perfect, so here are some flaws I guess I should acknowledge. Mind you that none of these issues truly get in the way of your experience with the game, so take that as you will. While I believe the game is very welcoming to novice players in its early stages, and the game isn't that much of an issue difficulty wise after having a healthy helping of good goodios, I can see how the game's later challenges can be a put off for some. The game will ask you to do some very precise platforming at times and expects you to know some of the more hard to understand quirks of its mechanic. Earlier in the review I said that Ristar has a nice weight to him when walking and jumping. But when you're first getting started, he can feel a bit floaty at times, which makes him a little bit difficult to control. Coming back to this game for this review reminded me just how hard the controls can be at times. Nothing that won't get in the way or after a little practice, but it still needs to be said. I hope you love grabbing things because that's all you're having for dinner. And for dessert, more grabbing. The enjoyment of Ristar really comes down to how you feel about the game's core mechanic, because it'll do little else to deviate from it. I think the game does a wonderful job at keeping things fresh with how Ristar interacts with his world. Others might not share that sentiment. And lastly, Ristar is a pretty big sprite, and this can cause issues with him taking damage from things off screen and taking leaps of fate from time to time. One rule that you have to accept when playing Ristar is that some things are going to be out of your control, and losing a life is part of that. Perhaps Ristar's biggest misstep was releasing the same year the Sony PlayStation did, in the US. And while everyone was looking forward to what true 3D gaming could provide, no one but a couple of people had an interest in what the previous consoles had in store for its closing act. And no, I'm not talking about fucking Frogger. I don't understand why the game wasn't put on the Sega Saturn. Sure, it would have took some flack for not being a 3D game, and everyone would have dismissed it that way, but surely more eyes would have been put on it. Ristar never got a sequel, and while that could be looked at as a negative, I see it as a positive. Just look at the Sonic IP after the adventure games. That series has been put through the ringer, and it took Sega until 2023 to gain some kind of momentum for the franchise. Would you really want that for Ristar? I wouldn't. I think I like the game as it is. A seriously charming and well-designed platformer with a unique gimmick and a fantastic soundtrack. Don't ever release a sequel, Sega. I don't want to see a game where a current-gen photorealistic human kisses Ristar to revive him after being killed by an evil Ristar after taking matters into his own hands with another different color Ristar who's a time traveler failed to do so. That time-traveling Ristar comes from the future because he was warned by a secretly evil Ristar that our Ristar destroyed his world, while an edgier Ristar works for the government for various reasons. Does that sound fun? See you next time.